She closed her eyes to die on the alien battlefield, but woke up in the arms of a human soldier instead. The sky above the ice world burned with ghostly fire. Not sunlight, not moonlight, just the long afterglow of war. Whole starships had crashed here, their twisted hulls half buried in glaciers that stretched further than the eye could follow. Every gust of wind carried a shrapnel dust, the sharp scent of burned metal, and the faint cries of a battlefield long abandoned. Naylis staggered through the drifts, her legs failing under her. Her body bore more scars than her soul could remember. The Zarathi were not supposed to be fragile. Her people were bred for resilience, tall, bronze-skinned, and proud. But war had stripped pride from her ribs, and hunger had hollowed her eyes. She could still hear the laughter of the mercenaries who had dragged her here, stripped her of her weapons, and left her to the cold. Her lips cracked when she whispered, "So this is how it ends." She sank beside the frozen wreck of a gunship. The fire inside its ruined engine had long gone out, leaving only a carcass of twisted metal for her to lean on. Her shoulder burned where a scar had been branded into her flesh, the mark of property. A reminder that she had been treated less than a warrior, less than a woman. She closed her eyes. The snow pressed in, her chest tightened with the final rhythm of surrender. She had once been destined for command, chosen for rituals older than human history. And now, she was nothing. The storm howled. And then, boots. Not Zarathi boots, heavier, metal-plated, deliberate. Her eyes flickered open against her will. Through the curtain of snow, a tall figure emerged. His silhouette was sharp against the white, broad shoulders armored in the matte black of the Terran Legion. His rifle was slung across his back, but his hand rested near the grip, scanning the ridges like a predator in no hurry to reveal itself. A human. Naylis' heart lurched, but she couldn't even summon the strength to crawl away. Her people had told stories of them. Humans, the stubborn species that had survived wars they should never have endured. Dangerous, ruthless, and yet infuriatingly loyal to their own. The man slowed when he saw her, boots crunching over the snow. For a moment, he didn't move closer. His eyes, ice gray beneath his scarred helmet visor, measured her the way a veteran measures a threat. Then carefully he crouched. His voice was low, roughened by years of battlefields. "Still alive?" Naylis tried to answer, but only a rasp of breath came. She flinched when his gloved hand touched her neck, searching for a pulse. Heat radiated from him, heat that cut through the cold more than she expected. "Damn," he muttered, "you're frozen through." She wanted to spit at him, to remind him that her people did not need human pity, but her lips barely moved. "Don't touch me," she whispered. He met her eyes, dark, ancient eyes clouded with exhaustion. And for the first time she saw something she hadn't expected. Not cruelty, not triumph, resolve. "I don't leave people to die in the snow," he said. His tone was flat, final. The kind of voice of someone who had given that promise too many times and still carried the weight of every failure. Naylis' vision blurred again. The storm swallowed the world. She felt herself being lifted, strong arms sliding beneath her frame. She was lighter than she should have been. She knew that shame too well. His chest plate was cold steel against her skin, but beneath it beat a heart steady as a war drum. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her again was the insignia on his shoulder. A silver crest worn down by ash, the mark of a commander. Commander Roaring Kale of the Terran Legion carried her through the blizzard as though he had carried ghosts before. 2 hours march to his outpost. 2 hours against a storm that could kill them both. But he didn't stop. Each step dug into his knees like iron. Each time she stirred against him, he glanced down, checking her breath with soldier's vigilance. The outpost bunker finally emerged through the veil of white, a fortress cut into the side of the mountain, half concealed by wreckage. The doors recognized his biosignature and slid open with a groan. Warmth spilled out, the hum of old generators, the scent of steel and oil. He carried her inside, down narrow corridors lit by amber lamps, until he reached his private quarters, a room sparse and cold, with nothing but a bunk, a table, and the relics of war. He set her down on his bed, the only one in the bunker. Her body trembled with the last threads of cold. Her lips were tinged blue, her pulse faint. Roran pulled off his gloves, lit the heating panels, and set a ration pack to warm in the fuel pot. His hands moved like a man who had done this before, not for aliens, but for soldiers, for brothers he had carried off the battlefield. When her eyes fluttered open again, she saw him sitting near the bunk, arms crossed, watching her like a hawk. She tried to sit, but her body betrayed her. "Don't," he said. "You'll tear yourself apart." Her throat tightened. "Why?" Roran tilted his head. "Why what?" "Why save me?" He let the silence stretch. His gaze was hard, unreadable, but his voice, when it came, was low and steady. "Because leaving you there would make me no better than the bastards who put you there." Naylis stared at him, trying to understand. Among her people, humans were spoken of as relentless, dangerous, unyielding. But this man had given her his bed and sat guard over her. Still, fear tightened her chest. Not fear of death. She had already surrendered to that. Fear of what a human might demand in return for mercy. Roran must have read it in her eyes, because he leaned back, deliberately pulling his presence away. "You're safe here. That's all you need to know tonight." The storm outside roared against the steel walls, shaking the bunker. Inside there was silence, only the rhythm of her shallow breaths and his steady watch. For the first time since the war had begun, Naylis slept, not in peace but in the fragile knowledge that someone else had chosen not to let her die. The storm outside raged for 2 days without pause. Ice battered the steel walls of the outpost until even its reinforced beams groaned. Beyond those walls lay silence that could kill in an instant. Inside the bunker, only the hum of power conduits and the crackle of the heater kept the void at bay. Naylis stirred on the narrow bunk. For the first time since she had collapsed on the battlefield, her body felt something other than pain. Warmth. The air here was dry, faintly metallic, and every breath reminded her she was not free. She was in the stronghold of a human. Her eyes opened slowly. Amber light filtered from a ceiling panel. The small chamber was bare, one bunk, one steel table, a rack of weapons leaning against the wall. At the far side, sitting in the only chair, the human commander watched her with the patience of stone. She tensed instantly, pulling the blanket higher across her bruised body. Her voice was raw, a whisper cracked by thirst. "You should have let me die." The man leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his gaze calm but sharp. "Maybe," he said, "but I didn't." Silence stretched between them. Naylis studied him, the scars carved along his jaw, the uniform frayed at the edges, the badge crest dulled by years of combat. He looked nothing like the mercenaries who had sold her, nor the zealots who had branded her. He looked like a man who had already carried too many ghosts. She forced herself upright, though her muscles screamed, "If your people find me here—" "They won't," he cut in. "This bunker's off-grid. Command thinks I'm alone out here." Her throat tightened. Alone. That word weighed heavier than she expected. He rose from his chair, towering over her for a moment before moving to the ration pot on the table. Without speaking, he poured steaming liquid into a metal cup and set it on the edge of the bunk. The smell was sharp, foreign. "Drink," he said. Naylis eyed it like poison. "You expect me to trust this? I expect you to decide whether you want to keep breathing." Their eyes locked, hers burning with suspicion, his unyielding with soldier's practicality. Finally, she reached for the cup, her hands trembling with weakness. The heat stung her palms, but when she drank, the liquid slid down her throat like fire. Her body shuddered, grateful despite itself. "Oh," the commander nodded once, as though that settled the matter. He returned to his chair, checking the readouts on a small handheld device. Naylis spoke again, her voice steadier now. "Who are you?" He hesitated. Roran Kale, Commander, Terran Legion. At least, that's what's left of it. She repeated the name under her breath, tasting it like a foreign word. Roran. His eyes flicked toward her, unreadable. And you? Nayla's lips pressed thin. Names were power among her people. Names bound you to memory. But withholding it now felt like clinging to the last shard of a broken shield. Slowly she said, Naleth. The name hung in the air between them, fragile but undeniable. Hours turned into a rhythm. Roran checked the perimeter systems, cleaned his rifle, ran diagnostics on the generator. Nelith remained on the bunk, her body slowly recovering. She watched him without meaning to, studying the way he moved. Efficient, controlled. Every action had purpose, as if idleness was foreign to him. He brought her food, compressed protein, bread ration, heated broth. She resisted at first, but hunger broke her pride. Each time she accepted the plate, he handed it over without comment. The silence in the bunker was heavy, but not empty. It was filled with small sounds. The scrape of metal as Roran disassembled a sidearm, the faint whistle of boiling water, the scratch of thread when Naleth tried to repair the torn strap of her dress with clumsy human tools. One evening as the storm outside thundered, she broke the silence. Why do you live here, alone in the ice? He didn't look up from the rifle he was cleaning. Because war doesn't end just because the generals say it does. Out here I can keep watch. Make sure what's left doesn't crawl back. Her brows furrowed. So you exile yourself? Roran set the rifle down, his expression hardening. I saw enough in the war. Too many walked past dying soldiers, telling themselves it wasn't their fight. I don't walk past, not anymore. The weight in his voice silenced her. She looked away, guilt pressing against her chest. She remembered the men who had dragged her through the snow, the way her own kin had abandoned her once the mark was burned into her skin. She whispered, "Then you are a fool." He almost smiled, though it was sharp as a blade. Maybe, but I'm a fool who sleeps at night. The second night, the temperature plummeted further. The heater hissed against the cold, but even wrapped in his blanket, Naleth's body shivered. She clenched her jaw, refusing to show weakness. Yet her teeth betrayed her, chattering against the silence. Roran noticed. He set down his datapad and crossed the room. She tensed as he approached, eyes narrowing, every instinct screaming to defend herself. He stopped at the edge of the bunk, his voice even. You won't survive like this. Fire's not enough. Body heat works faster. Her breath caught. Her heart raced at the suggestion, not because she misunderstood, but because she understood too well. No, she hissed. Roran didn't move closer. Your choice, but pride won't keep you alive. Minutes dragged. Her body shook harder, the cold seeping into bone. At last, with bitterness cutting her throat, she gave a single nod. Roran pulled off his boots and eased onto the bunk, careful to leave space. The blanket shifted, the warmth of his body radiating slowly into hers. At first she stayed rigid, curled tight on her side, but the cold pressed harder, and instinct betrayed her. She edged closer, her forehead brushing his shoulder. Her hand rested uncertainly against the plates of his chest armor. Through her trembling fingers, she felt the steady beat of his heart. Roran didn't move. He didn't claim. He didn't take. He simply lay still, offering warmth without demand. Her shivering eased. In the quiet, Naleth whispered words she hadn't meant to release. I thought I would die out there. I closed my eyes and waited. Roran turned his head slightly, meeting her gaze in the dim light. His voice was rough but steady. Not while I'm here. Her breath hitched. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe it. By morning, the storm had begun to break. Weak sunlight filtered through the slit windows, revealing a world buried deeper in snow than before. Naleth sat on the bunk, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders, watching as Roran strapped on his rifle and checked the doors. She expected him to chain her, to bind her, to remind her she was nothing but a liability. Instead, he simply said, "I'm going outside. Don't touch the comms. I'll be back." And then he left. For the first time in weeks, Nalith was alone without fear pressing her throat. She looked around the room, the weapons, the supplies, the coat he had left hanging near the door. The space no longer felt like a cell. It felt like a choice she had never expected. When Roran returned, snow crusted along his armor. She was still there, waiting. For the first time, her eyes met his without hostility. Snow had barely settled from the storm when Roran knew the silence had shifted. It wasn't the natural silence of frost and wind anymore. It was the silence of eyes watching. He returned from his morning patrol, boots heavy with ice, and found Nalith standing near the narrow viewport of the bunker. She had wrapped his spare coat around her frame, but her posture was sharp, alert. "You feel it too," she said softly. Roran set his rifle against the wall. Tracks, fresh, too careful for scavengers. Her jaw tightened. "They've found me." He studied her for a long moment. "Who?" Her hand brushed unconsciously over the scar on her shoulder. The brand burned deep into her skin. Her voice dropped, raw. "Hunters. They trade flesh for credits. My people sold me once. Others will sell me again if I am caught. But now," she swallowed, her throat working painfully, "now there is more. The brand wasn't just to mark me as property. It was a signal, a beacon in my blood. They will follow it." Roran's eyes narrowed. He didn't speak for a long time, then finally muttered, "Damn bastards." He picked up his rifle again and checked the chamber. Nalith's gaze followed his hands. "You'll fight for me? Even knowing what I am?" Roran looked at her, steady and cold. "Doesn't matter what you are. They come to my door. They answer to me." Something flickered in her eyes. Not trust, not yet, but the faintest crack in the wall she had built around herself. That night they prepared. The bunker had defenses, but they were old, relics of a forgotten campaign. Roran reinforced the outer perimeter, laying down tripwire mines and repositioning automated turrets. Nalith surprised him when she slipped outside into the snow, moving with the stealth of a predator. "You shouldn't be out here," he called. She crouched near a ridge, brushing frost away to reveal small flowering crystals growing through the ice. She plucked them carefully, her fingers trembling, and returned to him. "Your medkits are crude," she said, "but these, they slow bleeding, strengthen breath." Roran raised a brow. "You're a fighter and a healer?" Her lips curved faintly. Not a smile, but close. "All Zarathi women were taught. We were meant to outlast men in the long wars." "Looks like they underestimated you," he muttered, pocketing the plants. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the war, the cold, the hunters, all of it faded, leaving only two survivors standing in the snow. Nalith was the first to look away. The first attack came at dawn. Gunfire cracked across the ridge, echoing sharp against the mountains. Roran shoved Nalith down behind a steel barricade, just as the bunker's alarm blared. Figures emerged through the storm, mercenaries in ragged armor, rifles gleaming with frost. "Stay low," Roran barked. He leaned out, rifle braced against his shoulder, and fired controlled bursts. Two mercenaries dropped instantly, but more pressed forward. Their weapons spat red fire into the snow, melting it into steam. Nalith clenched her jaw, fingers itching for a weapon she no longer had. She spotted one mercenary trying to flank through the side ridge. "Left!" she shouted. Roran didn't hesitate. He swung, fired, and dropped the man before he reached cover. He glanced back at her, eyes narrowed. Good eyes. The battle stretched tense, each shot measured, every second critical. At last, the attackers retreated, dragging their wounded into the white horizon. Nalith exhaled shakily. "They won't stop, not until they have me." Roran reloaded, his hands steady. "Then we make sure they don't." For the next 3 days, the bunker became a fortress under siege. Nalith refused to stay on the bunk. She joined Roran in setting traps, wires strung beneath the snow, explosives hidden beneath driftwood, signal jammers to cloak their location. At night, she helped grind the alien flowers into salve, applying them to Roran's hands when the frostbitten skin cracked. He flinched at her touch at first, unused to gentleness, but she ignored it. "You've carried too much alone," she murmured one evening. His eyes lifted to hers, surprised by the softness in her tone. "I didn't ask for help." "And yet," she said, her hand brushing over his knuckles, "you have it." He didn't pull away. For the first time, silence between them wasn't distance. It was something fragile, almost sacred. On the fourth night, the hunters struck again. A blast rocked the outer wall, shaking the bunker to its frame. Roran grabbed his rifle, shoving a pistol into Nayla's hands. "Ever fire human tech before?" he asked quickly. She checked the grip with expert fingers, her expression hard. "A weapon is a weapon." The bunker doors shuddered under impact. Sparks flew from the hinges. "On my mark," Roran said, crouching low, eyes sharp. The doors exploded inward. Mercenaries flooded the entry hall, roaring with gunfire. Roran moved like a storm, his rifle barking fire, his body a wall between Naylath and the intruders. Naylath stayed close, aiming carefully, each shot precise. The pistol felt strange in her grip, but when one mercenary lunged too close, she fired point blank into his chest. The recoil jolted her arm, but the man collapsed instantly. Her breath caught. She had killed before, but never like this. Roran's voice cut through her thoughts. "Good. Keep steady." The firefight raged, filling the hall with smoke and blood. At last, the final mercenary fell. Silence returned, broken only by the hiss of the generator. Roran leaned against the wall, his armor scorched. Blood streaked his side where a shot had grazed him. Naylath dropped the pistol, rushing to him. "You're bleeding." "Not the first time," he muttered. She tore a strip of cloth from her dress, pressing it against his wound. He winced, then stilled as her hands worked quickly, applying salve, binding the cloth tight. Their faces were inches apart. She could feel his breath, ragged but steady. "You should have let me fight alone," she whispered. "Not happening," he said, his voice low. For a long moment they stayed like that, her hands pressed against his side, his gaze locked on hers. The battle outside had ended, but inside something far more dangerous had begun. By morning they buried the bodies in the snow, silent and grim. The horizon was still, but both knew it wouldn't last. The hunters would return, more of them, better prepared. Yet something had shifted. The night before, Roran had saved her life, and she had saved his. Trust, once unthinkable, had begun to take root. Naylath stood beside him at the edge of the ridge, the wind whipping her dark hair across her face. "They will never stop hunting me," she said quietly. Roran adjusted the strap of his rifle, his jaw hard. "Then they'll learn what happens when they hunt a soldier's doorstep." She turned to him, her voice trembling. "Why risk this? I am not your kind. I am not your war." Roran's gray eyes burned with a fire she hadn't seen before. "You're under my roof. That makes it my war." Her breath caught. For the first time, she felt what her people's stories had never admitted. Humans were not dangerous because they were ruthless. They were dangerous because when they chose to protect, they did it with everything they were. Naylath lowered her gaze, her voice barely a whisper. "Then perhaps I was meant to wake here." The snow had barely settled over the graves of the last mercenaries when new danger came. Not from shadows, but from the banners of Roran's own people. It began with static. The bunker's long-dead comms array, silent for weeks, crackled awake with a voice Roran had hoped never to hear again. "Commander Kale, this is Central Command. You are ordered to report immediately. Intelligence confirms harboring of enemy asset. Failure to comply will be met with force." Naylath froze at the words, her eyes sharp. "They know." Roran's jaw clenched. He shut the comms with a slam of his fist. "Damn fools. They'd rather chase one wounded woman than rebuild what's left of this war." Naylath's voice was low, bitter. I told you, they'll never stop. You should let me go. Roran turned on her, his eyes blazing. No, they want you because of whatever mark they burned into you. They'll chain you, tear you apart, use whatever's inside you until there's nothing left. I won't hand you to them. Naleth's breath caught at his fury, not directed at her but for her. For the first time she believed he meant it. 2 days later, the storm clouds broke, not with snow, but with fire. Drop ships descended from the sky, engines screaming, cutting through the frozen air. Their hulls bore the black and silver insignia of the Terran Legion. Dozens of soldiers disembarked, armored and armed. Their commander's voice boomed over loudspeakers. Roran Kale, you are charged with treason against the Legion. Surrender the alien and your post immediately. Inside the bunker, Naleth stood beside Roran at the viewport. Her hands trembled, but her gaze was hard. They are many. We cannot win. Roran loaded his rifle with precise movements. Maybe not, but we'll make them remember we didn't bend. He looked at her then, his face rough with scars, his eyes unyielding. Naleth, you stay behind cover. If they break through... No! She cut him off, her voice fierce. I will not hide while you bleed for me. If this ends, it ends with both of us. Something like pride flickered in his eyes. He nodded once. Then let's give them hell. The first barrage came like thunder. Explosives rocked the ridge, shaking snow loose in avalanches. Automated turrets fired back, mowing down the front line, but the soldiers advanced relentlessly, shields glowing in the white. Roran fired from the upper platform, his rifle barking flame into the storm. He moved with the precision of a veteran, each shot claiming an enemy. Naleth crouched behind the barricade, her stolen pistol in hand. For every soldier that fell, more filled the gap. Their voices echoed, "Hand her over. She's not yours to keep." The words cut deeper than bullets. She remembered the mercenaries, the brand on her skin, the way men had spoken of her like cargo. Rage welled inside her, a rage older than her scars. When one soldier breached the wall, charging toward Roran, Naleth moved without thought. She raised her hand, and for a heartbeat something ancient answered. The air shimmered. A pulse of blue-white energy burst from her palm, hurling the soldier backward into the snow. His armor cracked, smoke rising from the impact. Naleth stared at her own hand, trembling. I didn't... Roran's eyes flicked to her, wide for only a second before he barked, "Good! Do it again!" The battle turned into chaos. Human soldiers swarmed the outpost, their rifles blazing. Roran fought like a machine of war, his body remembering every battlefield he had ever survived. But even he could not hold forever. Naleth fought beside him, her fear turning into fire. The brand on her shoulder glowed faintly now, feeding some force within her. With each strike, she unleashed bursts of energy that shattered weapons, toppled walls, and hurled attackers back. The Terrans faltered, shaken by the sight of the very asset they had sought to claim. "She's active," one shouted. "Don't kill her! Contain her!" But Naleth's voice rose above the gunfire, raw and furious. "I am not your property!" Her cry carried through the storm, and with it, another surge of power. The ground itself cracked, snow and ice splitting as though the planet heard her rage. Roran seized the moment. He charged forward, striking down the commander of the assault with a blade drawn from his belt. The man fell into the snow, his orders silenced. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Soldiers hesitated, seeing their leader fallen, the alien blazing with power, the lone commander standing unbroken at her side. Then retreat signals blared. The survivors scrambled back to their dropships, engines roaring as they lifted away, leaving only smoke and bodies behind. The battlefield stank of ash and blood. Roran stood at the edge of the ridge, chest heaving, rifle heavy in his hand. His armor was scorched, his side bleeding. Naleth stumbled toward him, her legs trembling, the glow fading from her scar. She caught herself against his shoulder, her breath ragged. "They'll come back," she whispered. Roran slid an arm around her, steadying her. Then we'll be ready. She looked up at him, her eyes shimmering not with fear, but something deeper. Why? You could still leave me. Save yourself. He met her gaze, fierce and unflinching. Because I don't walk past the dying. Not you. Not ever. Her throat tightened. For the first time since the war began, her lips trembled into the faintest smile. You are the fool who sleeps at night, she murmured. And you, he said, his voice low, are the reason I still wake. That night the bunker was quiet. The dead had been burned, the walls repaired as best as two survivors could manage. Roran sat at the table, his wounds wrapped in makeshift bandages. Nayla sat across from him, her hands still faintly glowing from the power she didn't yet understand. For a long time they said nothing. The silence was no longer cold. It was alive with what they had shared. Finally, Nayla spoke. Her voice was soft, hesitant. When they branded me, I thought it was the end. I thought I was nothing. But when I woke here, I was still alive. And now, she broke off, her throat tight. Roran reached across the table, his calloused hand covering hers. His touch was warm, steady, unshakable. Now, he said, you're not alone. Her breath shuddered. She let her hand stay beneath his, her gaze locked on his scarred face. The world outside would never forgive what they had done, but in this bunker, in this fragile peace, something new had been born. Not property, not soldier, not enemy. Partners? The world outside was still frozen, but the war was over. At least here, in the shadow of the mountains. Smoke still curled from the wrecks of dropships scattered across the valley. The bunker walls bore scars of fire and impact, but inside there was silence. Not the silence of fear or despair. A different silence. One that belonged to survivors. Nayla sat by the heater, her dark hair unbound, falling across her shoulders. Her hands still tingled faintly. The echo of the power that had flared through her when the soldiers attacked. She stared at them as if they no longer belonged to her. I don't know what they made me, she whispered. I don't even know if I am still Zarathi. Roran leaned against the wall across from her, his arms folded. His armor was battered, his face streaked with dried blood. But his eyes were steady. You're Nalith, he said simply. That's enough. She lifted her gaze to him. For weeks she had looked at him with suspicion, with guarded fear. Now, when their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them. Not enemy, not burden, equal. The days that followed carried a strange rhythm. Roran repaired the perimeter, though he knew no repair could hold forever. Nalith gathered what little grew in the snow, strange flowers, bitter roots, and turned them into meals that warmed the body more than rations ever had. At night, when the wind screamed outside, they sat close by the fire. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't. It didn't matter. The silence was no longer a wall. It was a bridge. One evening, as Roran sharpened his blade, Nalith broke that silence. They'll come again. Your people. My people. Someone will always come. Roran set the blade down, looking at her across the glow. Then we don't wait for them here. Her brows furrowed. Where would we go? He leaned back, his voice steady. Anywhere. The galaxy's wide. Too wide for old wars to matter forever. We make our own place. Our own home. The thought struck her harder than she expected. Home. She hadn't spoken the word in years without pain. She studied him, the lines of his scarred face, the iron in his eyes. And if I say no, she asked softly. Then I'll stay, he said without hesitation. I won't force you anywhere. You choose. Her throat tightened. For so long, choice had been stolen from her. Chains, brands, commands, every step dictated by someone else's will. But now in this ruined bunker, she held the one thing she thought she had lost forever. Freedom. She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again. I choose yes. The journey began at dawn. Roran packed supplies, what little ammunition remained, rations, tools. He dismantled the weapons cache, loading only what could be carried. Nalith helped, her movements sure and steady now, no longer the trembling survivor he had first lifted from the snow. When they stepped outside, the world stretched endless before them. The sun rose weakly over the white horizon, painting the glaciers gold. Nalith pulled his spare coat tighter around herself, her breath steaming in the cold. This place, it almost feels like it doesn't want to let go. Roran glanced back at the bunker. For years it had been his prison, his penance, his solitude. Now it was only ashes. Then it's time we make it let go. They walked together into the snow. 3 weeks later, they reached the Valley of Thaw. The ice had melted into rivers, the soil breaking free beneath their boots. Strange flowers rose from the earth, glowing faintly in the twilight. For the first time, Nalith felt warmth on her skin that wasn't stolen from a heater. Here, life had endured. Roran set down his pack by a ridge. This will do, he said simply. Nalith looked around, uncertain. Do? For what? He crouched, running his calloused hand through the soil. For a beginning. The words struck her like a pulse. A beginning. Not survival, not hiding. Something more. Her hands shook as she stepped closer. You would build here? With me? Roran rose, meeting her gaze. His gray eyes were steady, unflinching. With you, if you'll have it. Her breath caught. For so long she had been told what she was worth. To mercenaries, she was property. To soldiers, she was a weapon. To her people, she was shame. But to this human, this stubborn, scarred fool, she was simply Nalith. She reached for his hand, her voice trembling but sure. Then let it begin. The weeks that followed were not easy. They built shelter from wreckage and wood, piecing together walls that held against the wind. Roran hunted, his rifle steady. Nalith tended fires, mended clothes, coaxed the alien flowers into salves that healed wounds. They worked side by side, sweat and breath mingling in the thin air, and each night, when the stars burned bright above, they lay close by the fire. At first for warmth, then for something else. One night as the fire crackled low, Nalith whispered, I used to dream of dying. It felt easier than fighting. Roran's hand tightened around hers. And now? She turned, her forehead brushing his. Now I dream of living. Their lips met then, slow, uncertain, but carrying the weight of every battle they had fought together. For Nalith, it was proof she was more than what had been done to her. For Roran, it was proof he wasn't meant to die alone in the cold. The fire burned low, but their world had only just begun to burn bright. Seasons changed. The valley grew green, streams cutting through the once frozen soil. Their small shelter became a home, a table carved from wood, a roof patched against storms, a cradle of flowers Nalith planted by the doorway, glowing faint in the dusk. One evening as they stood together at the ridge, the sky flared with light from distant engines, dropships far above the atmosphere, patrols. Nalith's breath caught. They're still searching. Roran rested his hand on her shoulder, steady as stone. Then let them. They won't find what they don't understand. She looked at him, her chest tight with emotion. And what are we, Roran Kale? He turned to her, his hand rising to brush her cheek, his voice low and certain. We're ours. That's all that matters. Tears burned in her eyes. She leaned into his hand, letting the truth of it settle deep. No war, no brand, no chains. Only choice, only belonging. Years later, stories would be told of the soldier who vanished from his post, and the alien woman who vanished from the battlefield. But those stories never found the truth. The truth was here, in a valley where the snow melted, where two survivors built something the galaxy had forgotten. Not conquest, not power. Home. Nalith woke each morning to the sound of birds instead of gunfire, to warmth instead of frost, and each morning, when she turned and found Roran beside her, scars and all, she remembered the day she had closed her eyes to die, and the day she had opened them again, not in chains, but in his arms. The world would not stop hunting, the wars would not end. But for Nalith and Roran, none of that mattered anymore. They had chosen each other, and in the end that choice was stronger than any chain, any brand, any army. They belonged, not to empires, not to species, not to war, but to each other.